My name is Dulce Witford. I am 28 years old, and for 2 decades, I was the unfortunate footnote in a family built on high-gloss perfection. The Witfords are old money Manhattan. Our name is etched into the marble of hospital wings and museum plaques. My father, Gerald Witford, measures a person's soul by the prestige of their degree and the sharpness of their vowels. To him, the world is a leaderboard, and at the very top sat my sister, Miranda. The Harvard law prodigy, the golden child, the one destined to inherit the $92 million real estate empire my grandmother, Eleanor, built from a single Brooklyn storefront in 1965. And then there was me. I was diagnosed with dyslexia at 7. While Miranda was breezing through Tolstoy, the letters on my pages were dancing, rearranging themselves into a chaotic soup. My parents didn't see a child struggling, they saw a faulty product. They hired world-class tutors for Miranda. Violinists, diplomats, SAT experts. When I asked for help, my mother, Priscilla, would just sigh, her heavy gold bracelets clinking as she rubbed her temples. "Dulce, honey," she'd say, her voice dripping with acid pity. "We've spent so much on specialists. At some point, we have to accept that some children just aren't academic. You have other qualities. You're very good at organizing the linen closet." I was 12 years old. I believed her. I spent my life in the shadows, sitting at the far end of the mahogany table during Thanksgiving galas, watching the light glint off the awards Miranda collected like trading cards. I was the Witford family's embarrassing secret, the slow one they kept in the back of the room so as not to spoil the aesthetic of their success. But tonight, at the Plaza Hotel, the aesthetic was about to be shattered. It was Miranda's Harvard Law graduation gala. 300 guests filled the grand ballroom. The air smelled of expensive lilies and perfume that costs more than my monthly rent. I was sitting at table 27, tucked behind a massive marble pillar near the service entrance. My mother had placed me there specifically so I wouldn't clutter the photos of the main stage. I watched as my father stood at the podium, a glass of vintage Cristal in his hand. He looked every bit the mogul. Silver-haired, impeccably tailored, radiating a pride he only ever directed at Miranda. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gerald announced, his voice booming. "Tonight, we don't just celebrate a degree. We celebrate the future of the Witford legacy. Miranda has been handpicked to take over the helm of Witford Properties when I retire next year. As of tonight, I am formally announcing that Miranda will be the sole beneficiary of my estate. The Park Avenue penthouse, the $13 million trust, and 100% of the voting shares in the company." A roar of applause erupted. Miranda stood beside him in a $10,000 emerald gown, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. She looked at me for a split second, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth, a look that said, "Finally, the hierarchy is official." I stared at my plate. I felt small. I felt erased. I felt like the slow girl they always said I was. But then, the air behind me shifted. A man in a charcoal gray suit stepped out from behind the pillar. He had the cold, clinical air of a man who dealt in facts, not feelings. He leaned over my shoulder and placed a heavy, cream-colored envelope on the tablecloth next to my bread plate. "Miss Witford," he whispered. Yes?" I stammered, looking around to see if my mother was watching. "My name is Jonathan Ellis. I was your grandmother Eleanor's private counsel. She left this for me to give to you on this exact night. She was very specific about the timing." I looked at the envelope. It was sealed with red wax, stamped with a notary's seal. "What is it?" I asked, my heart beginning to thud. "It's the truth, Dulce," Ellis said, his eyes meeting mine with fierce intensity. "Your grandmother was a very observant woman. She saw what happened at Christmas in 2018. She saw the way they looked at you. And she decided that the Witford empire didn't belong to the loudest person in the room, it belonged to the one who was actually paying attention." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a rasp. "Your father thinks he's giving Miranda the keys to the kingdom tonight. But he forgot one thing, he never actually owned the kingdom. Eleanor did. And she left the keys in that envelope. He disappeared into the crowd before I could ask another question. I looked at the stage. My father was hugging Miranda, the cameras flashing, the elite of New York cheering for the disinheritance of the slow daughter. I looked at the envelope in my lap. I didn't know it yet, but inside was a check for $47 million and a legal document that would turn my father's greatest night into his worst nightmare. Before I open this envelope and show you the contents that made my mother drop her champagne glass in horror, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever been the one everyone counted out? Have you ever been mocked for the way your brain works? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Because tonight, the dumb one is about to take the throne. And she's not taking any prisoners. To understand the magnitude of what was in that envelope, you have to understand the life I lived for 28 years. In the Witford family, information was a currency, and I was perpetually bankrupt. My father didn't just call me slow, he weaponized the word. He used it to justify why I wasn't allowed at board meetings and why I was relegated to a cubicle in the copy room while Miranda was given a corner office with a view of Central Park. Dully, he'd say, a nickname I hated because it sounded like dull, we just want to protect you. Real estate requires a level of cognitive agility that you just don't possess. Stay in the office, handle the filing, and let Miranda do the heavy lifting. I grew up believing my brain was a broken machine. But while my parents were busy mourning the daughter they thought they had, my grandmother Eleanor was watching the daughter I actually was. Eleanor Witford was the real power. She had built the company in an era when women weren't even allowed credit cards. Every Sunday, I'd take the subway to her apartment. My parents thought it was a charity visit. They didn't know that behind those closed doors, Eleanor was putting me through the most intensive business school in the world. She didn't use textbooks, she knew I'd struggle with the blocks of text. Instead, she used blueprints and flowcharts. Dully, she'd say, her voice as sharp as a diamond cutter. Your father reads a contract like a lawyer. He looks for words he can twist. But a building isn't made of words. It's made of systems. Look at this blueprint. Tell me where the money is flowing. Because my brain didn't process symbols the way others did, I saw patterns. I saw where the structural supports were weak, not just in the steel, but in the financing. There, I'd say, pointing to a specific junction. The holding company is taking a 3% skim before the subcontractors are paid. Eleanor would smile a predatory grin. Exactly. You see the gaps, sweetheart. Everyone else is too busy reading the fine print to see the whole building. Don't let them tell you you're slow. You're just operating on a higher frequency. In 2019, she called me to her bedside. Your father is a good manager, but a terrible builder, she whispered. He values ego over equity. He thinks because Miranda went to Harvard, she has the Witford spirit. She doesn't. She has his vanity. She reached under her pillow and pulled out a dark mahogany box. Keep this. Don't open it until the day Gerald shows you exactly who he is. Until he tries to erase you entirely. When that day comes, you call Jonathan Ellis. I hid the box behind a stack of audiobooks. I tried to be the daughter they wanted. I took the $42,000 a year job. I fetched the coffee. I let Miranda mock my cheap shoes while she wore Prada bought with Dad's money. I waited for them to love me. But then came the restructuring email. 3 weeks before the Plaza Gala, HR informed me my position was being eliminated. I walked toward my father's office and heard his voice through the door. We can't have her there when Miranda takes over, Priscilla. It looks bad. The CEO's sister working as a secretary? It's better if she just fades away. We'll give her a few months of pay and let her find something more suited to her pace. I didn't knock. I didn't scream. I went home, opened that mahogany box, and found a USB drive with a note. The will they read after my funeral wasn't the last one. I knew Gerald would try to bury you, so I buried a landmine for him. Call Jonathan. I spent 3 days in a fever dream. I met Jonathan Ellis in a quiet diner. He showed me the real will, notarized in 2019, months after my father tried to strip Eleanor of her rights while she was hospitalized. He thought she was too slow to notice his power grab, Ellis said. She was the architect. She saw the skim. And she decided to skim back. Tomorrow was Miranda's big night. The night my father would publicly disinherit me. And I was going to be there, sitting at table 27, waiting for the fuse to be handed to me. There is an old saying in construction, the most dangerous person on the site is the one you think isn't paying attention. For 2 years, I was that person at Witford Properties. My father and sister treated me like a piece of office furniture, functional, silent, and completely invisible. I spent 8 hours a day in the basement copy room, a windowless bunker that smelled of ozone and hot paper. But the copy room was the central nervous system of the company. Every contract, every confidential memo, and every floor plan for a multi-million-dollar acquisition passed through my hands. My parents thought my dyslexia was a shield. They thought because I struggled with blocks of text, I wouldn't be able to read their business. They didn't realize I wasn't reading the words. I was reading the patterns. Whenever a major deal came through, I'd lay the papers out on the floor. I developed a system of visual shorthand, flowcharts that used colors and shapes to represent shell companies and interest rates. I saw how my father was over-leveraging the Brooklyn portfolio to fund his ego projects in Miami. I saw how Miranda was drafting bulletproof contracts with intentional loopholes designed to benefit her future partners. I was the copy room spy, and I had a more accurate picture of the company's health than the entire board of directors. I remember one afternoon, Miranda walked into the basement wearing a power suit that cost more than my car. She tossed a thick stack of papers onto my desk without looking at me. "Dulce, I need 50 copies of this by 4 p.m. Collated. And try not to mess up the page numbers. I know how confusing numbers can be for you." She paused, looking at a complex web of circles and arrows on the wall behind my desk. "What is this?" "Just art," I lied, my heart hammering. "It helps me stay focused." Miranda laughed, a brittle, mocking sound. "Art. Right. Maybe you can sell it on the sidewalk when Dad finally realizes you're a drain on the payroll. Stick to the copying, Dulce. It's the only thing you're halfway decent at." She walked out, the click-clack of her heels sounding like a death march. I looked at that diagram. What I'd mapped out was a $4 million shortfall in the South Pier budget, a gap my father was trying to hide by moving money from the employee pension fund. He was committing fraud, and he was so confident in my slowness that he let me photocopy the evidence. That night, I opened the USB drive from Eleanor's mahogany box. The file was labeled the architect's ledger. Inside were recorded calls Eleanor had collected during her final months. She'd known my father was cooking the books. "Gerald thinks he's a king," Eleanor's voice crackled through my laptop. "But a king is only as strong as his foundation. He has built his house on the lie that you are weak, Dulce. But I have watched you solve puzzles in minutes that take him hours." The recording paused. "In the drawer of my desk at the apartment, there is a false bottom. Inside is the original 1965 partnership agreement. Your father's copy is missing the founder's clause. He thinks the company is his to give away. It isn't. It belongs to the majority shareholder. And as of my final will, that's not him. It's you." I felt a cold shiver of adrenaline. My father was at the Plaza Hotel right now, telling the world that Miranda was the sole heir. He had no idea that the copy room spy was actually the majority shareholder. I looked at the clock. 8:45 p.m. At the plaza, the main course was being served. In 15 minutes, the stranger in the gray suit would walk up to table 27. I reached for my phone and dialed Jonathan Ellis. "It's time," I said. "I'm already in the lobby," Ellis replied. "Are you ready to stop being invisible, Dulce?" "I'm ready to show them the architecture," I said. I stood up and caught my reflection in the mirror. I didn't see the slow girl. I saw the daughter who had finally found the gap in the deal. The Witford empire was about to meet its new CEO. And she was bringing the receipts. The service entrance of the Plaza Hotel is a maze of stainless steel and shouting chefs. It was the only place I could find enough silence to breathe. I stood under a buzzing fluorescent light and broke the red wax seal. Inside were 3 pages of notarized text and a letter from Eleanor. My eyes struggled with the first paragraph, the letters dancing, but I forced them into focus. I didn't read the words, I read the structure. I, Eleanor Margaret Witford, do hereby revoke all previous documents. To my granddaughter, Dulce Witford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Witford Properties LLC, currently valued at approximately $47 million. Controlling interest. I leaned against the cold tile wall. $47 million. It didn't feel real. But it wasn't the money that made my head spin, it was the condition at the bottom, the 72-hour fuse. To activate this bequest, Dulce must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours. Failure to act will render this will null and void. My grandmother knew me. She knew if she gave me a month, I'd talk myself out of it. I'd let my father's voice back into my head. The deadline wasn't a punishment, it was a cage for my doubt. I walked back into the ballroom. The atmosphere was a triumphant frenzy. My father was surrounded by investors, looking like a king. Miranda was nearby, glowing with the smug satisfaction of a woman who had finally won. I walked straight toward them. My mother, Priscilla, intercepted me. Her eyes went to the envelope. Dulce? Where have you been? I had to tell people you had a headache. I don't have a headache, Mom, I said, my voice steady. I have a will. The real one. Don't be difficult just because Miranda is being celebrated, she snapped. I'm not being difficult, I said. I'm being the majority shareholder. I pushed past her to my father. He was mid-story with a bank CEO. He saw me and his smile faltered. Not now, Dulce, he hissed. We're discussing the South Pier project. Actually, Dad, I said, loud enough for the CEO to hear. We should discuss South Pier. Specifically the $4 million shortfall in the pension fund transfer you authorized last Tuesday. The air at the table went vacuum-sealed. The CEO's eyebrows shot up. My father's face went a mottled, angry purple. What did you just say? He whispered. I've requested an emergency board meeting for Monday at 10 a.m. Grandma Eleanor left me her 51%. And I think the board would be very interested to see the architect's ledger I've been keeping in the copy room. Miranda snarled, you're delusional. That will is a forgery. You'll be in a jail cell for fraud before the sun comes up. If it's a forgery, Miranda, I said, then why are you shaking? I looked at the 300 people who had spent the night celebrating my erasure. I looked at the stranger in the gray suit, nodding from the shadows. 72 hours, Dad, I said, leaning in. The fuse is lit. You can spend that time looking for a lawyer, or a new job. Because at 10:01 a.m. on Monday, I'm taking my company back. I walked out of the plaza and into the cool Manhattan night. I didn't take the subway. I hailed a yellow cab, something I'd never been able to afford. Where to, miss? The driver asked. Whitford Tower, I said. I have some blueprints to study. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of cold steel. I stood in front of Whitford Tower, a 42-story monument to my family's ego. I was wearing a borrowed gray blazer, my portfolio clutched to my chest. In my pocket, my phone vibrated with a stream of messages from my mother. Priscilla, Dulce, please. Stop this madness. Your father is in a state. We can give you a bigger allowance. Just don't go into that meeting. Allowance. Even now, she thought this was about a payday. She couldn't conceive of a world where I actually wanted the responsibility. I walked into the lobby. The security guard, Marcus, stepped out. Sorry, Dulce. I have orders. You're not authorized for the 42nd floor. Gerald said you've been terminated effective immediately. I haven't been terminated, Marcus, I said, pulling a paper from my portfolio. I've been promoted. This is a court-certified copy of the majority shareholders' petition. If you block me, you're interfering with a legal board proceeding. Marcus saw something in my eyes he'd never seen before, a total lack of hesitation. He stepped aside and swiped his badge for the executive elevator. Good luck up there, Miss Witford, he whispered. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor took 40 seconds. 40 seconds to leave the basement copy room behind forever. When the doors opened, I was met by a wall of high-priced suits. The 12 members of the board of directors were gathered in the hallway, real estate titans and hedge fund managers. My father and Miranda stood at the end of the hall, flanked by lawyers. Robert, tell her she can't be here. Gerald shouted at the board chairman, Robert Hartley. My daughter is suffering from a mental break. She's trying to disrupt the succession. Robert Hartley, a man who looked like he was carved out of granite, turned to me. He'd been Eleanor's closest friend. He looked at my scuffed shoes and the portfolio in my hand. She has the will, Gerald, Hartley said. And she has Jonathan Ellis. If we don't let her in, we're inviting a lawsuit that will freeze this company's assets for 5 years. Is that what you want? Gerald's jaw worked, but no words came out. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not for his child, but the fear of a predator who realizes the prey is armed. We filed into the boardroom, a cathedral of walnut and leather. At the head of the table sat an empty chair, the founder's chair. My father moved toward it, but Hartley held up a hand. Not today, Gerald. Until the will is authenticated, no one sits in the founder's chair. I sat at the far end. Jonathan Ellis sat beside me. My father and Miranda sat opposite, their lawyers whispering frantically. This meeting is called to order, Hartley announced. Miss Witford, you have the floor. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but I remembered Eleanor's voice, the architecture is the truth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I said. I know many of you have been told I am slow. That I lack the Whitford spirit. That my sister is the only capable heir. I opened my portfolio and pulled out the visual diagrams I'd perfected over the weekend. But while I was in the copy room, I wasn't just filing papers. I was auditing the South Pier project. I was mapping the $4 million shortfall in the pension fund transfer. And I was studying the 1965 partnership agreement. I slid a diagram across the table to Robert Hartley. My father thinks he can give the company to Miranda. But Section 14 of the 1965 agreement, the Founders Clause, states that controlling interest can only be transferred to a blood heir who has served a minimum of 2 years in an operational role. Miranda has been here for 1 month. Miranda's face went white. I'm chief legal counsel. That's an operational role. Not according to the bylaws, Jonathan Ellis interrupted. Counsel is an advisory role. But an administrative assistant? That's operational. Dulce has served 2 years and 4 months. She is the only heir who meets the criteria. My father slammed his hand on the table. This is a technicality. A loophole. My mother was a dying woman. She was being manipulated by this copy girl. She wasn't being manipulated, Dad, I said, my voice rising. She was protecting her building. And she left me the blueprints to show you exactly how you've been undermining it. I have a recording I think you all need to hear. From March 2018. The day Dad tried to strip Grandma of her power. The copy room spy was about to pull the pin. The silence in the boardroom was so heavy it felt like it had physical mass. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the USB drive. The one Eleanor had hidden in the mahogany box. I looked at Robert Hartley. Mr. Chairman, my grandmother knew that one day, her son would claim she was unfit to justify his own power grab. She wanted the board to hear exactly what he thought of her, and you, when he thought no one was listening. I plugged the drive into the media hub. On the 90-inch screen, a file appeared, March 14, 2018, private office. A crackle of static filled the room, then my father's voice, sharp and predatory, cut through the air. Eleanor is 81, Priscilla, the recording blared. She doesn't understand the market. She's too slow to see the value in the South Pier skim. The board? I have Hartley and Coleman in my pocket. They'll do whatever I tell them as long as the dividends stay high. We'll tell them she's having memory issues. They'll be relieved to have her out of the way. The recording ended. I watched Robert Hartley's face. The man who had been my father's biggest ally went as still as a statue. His gaze shifted to my father, his eyes narrowing into two slits of cold, corporate fury. "In your pocket, Gerald?" Hartley asked, his voice a dangerous whisper. "Robert, that was the private conversation." Gerald stammered, his face a mottled shade of purple. I was stressed. "I didn't mean it that way." "You meant to lie to this board about your mother's health to facilitate an illegal skim," Margaret Coleman, the oldest board member, interjected. She looked at me. Eleanor wasn't slow. She was waiting. She knew exactly what you were doing. I stood up, leaning my hands on the walnut table. "This is the architect's ledger, Mr. Hartley. My father thought I was too dumb to see the patterns. But I've mapped every dollar of that $4 million pension shortfall. I've mapped the shell companies. And I have the notarized 2019 will." I slid the final document across the table. Grandma Eleanor left me her 51%. But she also left me the authority to call for an immediate vote of no confidence in the CEO. Based on the evidence of fraud. I am invoking that right. Now. Miranda stood up, her face a mask of desperation. "You can't do this. You're a secretary. You'll destroy everything our family has built." "I'm not destroying the family, Miranda," I said. "I'm restoring the foundation. You and Dad didn't build this. You just tried to remodel it with lies." Robert Hartley stood up. He didn't look at my father. "Miss Witford, the board needs 30 minutes to review the legal authenticity of this will and the pension shortfall. Jonathan Ellis, please join us." The board members filed out, their faces grim. My father and Miranda were left sitting at the table. My mother, Priscilla, appeared in the doorway, her Chanel bag clutched to her chest. "Dulce," she whispered. "If you take the company, we'll lose everything. The penthouse, the reputation, the gala invites, you're destroying our lives." "You destroyed my life at 7 years old, Mom," I said. "You decided I was worthless because I couldn't read a storybook as fast as Miranda. You sat by while they restructured me out of the company I spent my Sundays learning to love." I picked up my portfolio. "You didn't care about my life when I was in that basement copy room. Why should I care about your penthouse now?" I walked out of the boardroom and looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below me, Manhattan was a grid of patterns, a living blueprint. For 28 years, they told me I was slow. But as I watched the board members talking, I realized I wasn't slow at all. I was just waiting for the concrete to set. The 72-hour fuse was down to the final minutes. And the Witford empire was about to have a new architect. The executive lounge of Witford Properties is a soundproof vault of mahogany and silk. But even through the heavy doors, I could feel the tectonic plates of the family empire shifting. I looked at my hands, they were steady. The slow girl was gone, replaced by a woman who had spent 2 years memorizing the cracks in her father's armor. The boardroom doors opened. Robert Hartley and the directors walked out looking like they were coming from a sentencing. "Take your seats," Hartley announced. My father and Miranda scurried back to the table, their lawyers trailing them like beaten dogs. "We have reviewed the 2019 will," Hartley began, his voice carrying the finality of a gavel. "The signatures are authentic. And under the Founder's Clause, Dulce Witford is the only blood heir who fulfills the operational requirements. Effective immediately, the board recognizes Dulce as the majority shareholder." A sharp, hysterical laugh escaped Miranda. This is a joke. You're giving $92 million to a girl who can barely read a balance sheet? She's been reading your balance sheets for 2 years, Miranda, Margaret Coleman snapped. And she found a $4 million hole that you, with your Harvard law degree, apparently missed. Hartley turned to my father. Gerald, the board has voted unanimously. We are stripping you of your duties as CEO, effective immediately. We are also filing a report with the SEC regarding unauthorized fund diversions. My father didn't shout. He just sat there, looking like a balloon that had finally run out of air. You can't do this, he whispered. I'm a Witford. So is she, Hartley replied. He looked at me. Miss Witford. As majority shareholder, you can appoint a new CEO, or take the position yourself. I looked at my sister. Miranda was staring at me with pure, concentrated hatred. She was realizing her partner track had just hit a dead end. I'm not going to be the CEO, I said. My father's head snapped up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. I have the vision, but not the decades of experience this company needs to survive the scandal my father created. I want Robert Hartley as interim CEO for the next 18 months. I leaned forward, locking eyes with my father. But I am restructuring the team. Miranda Witford is terminated. Her partner track is closed. And Gerald Witford is to vacate his office by 5 p.m. today. He will be allowed no further access to this floor. You're kicking us out? My mother shrieked. Where are we supposed to go? You have the Park Avenue penthouse, Mom, I said. And you have the allowance Dad promised me. Use it to find a life that isn't built on someone else's shadow. The meeting is adjourned. I walked out. As I reached the elevator, Miranda grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. You think you've won? You're still the slow girl, Dulce. Everyone will see through you. I pulled away. The thing about being slow, Miranda, is you learn to see the patterns while everyone else is racing to the finish line. I saw you coming 2 years ago. And I saw the gap you left in the South Pier contracts. The doors opened. I'm not the slow one anymore, I said. I'm the one who owns the building you're standing in. Now get out of my hallway. The doors closed on her shocked face. I descended 42 floors. In the lobby, Marcus the security guard stood at attention. Everything go okay, Miss Witford? Everything is according to the blueprints, Marcus, I said. I walked out into the Manhattan sun. The sky was still the color of steel, but for the first time in 28 years, I didn't feel like a footnote. I was the architect. And the skyline was finally mine. Revenge is a word people use to describe a fire. But what I felt as I walked away from Witford Tower wasn't heat. It was the cool, solid weight of a structure that had finally been balanced. For the first week, my phone was a war zone. 88 messages in a single night from my mother. Dulce, how could you? Your father is a broken man. Miranda has lost her job offer. We are a family. We can fix this. I didn't answer a single one. I spent that week in a quiet hotel in Brooklyn, the neighborhood where Eleanor started her empire. I sat in a small room with a view of the bridge, and I worked. I wasn't reading blocks of text. I was using my visual brain to map out a new future for Witford Properties, one built on the integrity Eleanor had championed. On Friday, a final letter from Eleanor arrived. Dully, the script read, a comfort now rather than a puzzle. If you've taken the company, you've realized your disability was actually your greatest asset. You see the world in systems. Your father only saw the parts he could sell. Build something that lasts. You are the architect of the Witford legacy now. I went back to Witford Tower on Monday morning. I didn't go to the basement. I took the executive elevator to the 42nd floor. The corner office was empty. The mahogany desk was gone, replaced by a simple glass table. The air didn't smell like cigar smoke and ego anymore, it smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Robert Hartley met me at the door. The SEC has finished the audit, Dulce. Your father has reached a settlement. He'll be barred from serving as an officer in a public company for 10 years. Miranda has relocated to Florida, a small firm in Boca Raton. And the company? I asked. The investors are impressed with the new blueprint, Hartley said. They like the transparency. For the first time in a decade, the Witford name actually means something again. I sat in the chair behind the glass table. I looked at the blueprints spread out before me. I could see the patterns. I could see the city rising. For 28 years, they told me I was the dumb one. They mocked my dyslexia at dinner tables. They excluded me from the photos. They tried to restructure me out of existence. But as I looked at the skyline of New York, the buildings Eleanor had built, the ones I was going to save, I realized they were right about one thing. I was different. I read the world as an architect. I saw the gaps. I saw the schemes. And I saw the foundation. My name is Dulce Witford. I am the majority shareholder of Witford Properties. I am the architect of a $92 million empire. And I am no longer invisible. The 72-hour fuse had long since burned out. But in its place, a new light was shining over Manhattan. And for the first time, I could read every single word of the story I was writing. That's my story. If it gave you the courage to stop believing the labels people put on you, if it made you realize that your weakness might be your greatest strength, then the 51% was worth every second of the struggle. I'll see you in the next Family Story File.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe Family Files for more.